Okay, as you can see it up, understand that in this package there is a prefab fire. Oh, that's right, you can't drag that one in, it's not a prefab. But there's already materials for fire, so you can change out the material on this and use their fire or their alternate. We're going to create an alternate 2. So you can use those if you want to differentiate your fire so they look a little different. Always understand though, if you do that, now your computer's got to render 3 different particle system materials versus the one single one 3 times. So it is a little bit more taxing. So we eventually run this on your phone or you run this game on your Chromebooks, it may not run as well because you've taken more resources by doing that. So first thing we have to do is we have to go to Game Object and we want to go to Effects and it says Particle System.
Thank you. Particle System?
Particle System. So you see here I have one. When you first make it, sometimes it's hard to tell where it is. I usually drop it under the ground to get an idea of where it actually is. And there it is right there. So once you find yours, we can start working on it. It doesn't really matter where it is right now because when we're ready to attach it to the lantern, we're going to drag it into the lantern and zero it out and it'll be in the center. So you just need to be able to see it so you can work on it. Make sure it's above ground and not below the ground. Once you select it, it animates. And you see this little window down here that says particle effect. And the reason for that, I'm wondering if I'm even recording. Yes, I am. The reason for that is so that as you're working on it, you can see what that effect looks like. Otherwise, it would be static. So when I select off of it, it becomes static. It doesn't move. But once I choose that particle system, then it becomes active again, and I can see what it is I'm working on. So there's a few things here in the inspector panel that are important. Obviously the position, it will help you determine where it actually is until it has more form. But scaling it, once you make it, you can scale it as big as you want. So let's say we did a particle system and it was, you had water shooting out like it was coming out of a hole in a wall. You could actually take that same, scale it up, and now it becomes a waterfall. And vice versa, you could take a waterfall and scale it down and make it something small to suit your needs. Sometimes you do have to clean things up because the particles are the wrong size, but the more you play with it, the more you'll understand particle systems. So think of anything that's special effects in a game is created with the particle system. Very rarely is it an actual animation. There's generally a particle system involved, whether it's a muzzle flash, whether it's an explosion, whether it's smoke, water that's running, that's flowing somehow as an effect. It's generally a particle system. So on ours, you see in our inspector panel, it gives us some information about this particular object that we're working with. One is the duration. The duration is how long does that particle live after it's created, or in computer terms, instantiated. So right now the duration is 5. So we're going to change our duration from 5 to 1 because we want our particles to live for a shorter time because it's supposed to be a fire. So what we want is our fire to come up and then just have that final lick as it comes up and disappear. Looping means your animation runs forever. So if this was an explosion that you were creating, you wouldn't want it to loop because it would explode that one time and that would be the end of it. But in this case where it's fire, we do want it to loop. And you see the setting that says pre-warm, we need to turn that on. What pre-warm does is forces this particular particle system to run before the level starts. So if you have a bunch of fires and you don't have pre-warm, when your level loads, all of a sudden it'll look like the fire started after the level has run and the person sees the scene. So by setting pre-warm, it tells it before you start the scene, make sure you run these particle systems because I need them running before the scene starts. We're not going to have a start delay because we're doing pre-warm. The lifetime on these, what did I come up with when I made mine? Lifetime on these should be 1. And we should have our start speed should be 1. So our lifetime is right there. Lifetime in seconds. So for 1 second, it's going to emit, and then it's going to die, which is different from the duration, which is the length of the particle system. So we're making it, everything happens in 1 second, and then they're going to die in 1 second. Start speed is the speed to the direction that's moving. We're going to use a 1. If we wanted to speed that up, you can see if I went to 10, how that speeds it up and changes the look because now it's living for 1 second, but it's going 10 times as fast before it dies. So we're going to leave it at 1. And then we have our start size at 1, which is the size of the particle. Our start rotation, I'll look at my notes to see what I decided on that. We are going to do on this flyout tab, we're going to change it to random between 2 constants. And what that does is allows our particle to rotate randomly between 2 constants. So 0 degrees is our first one, and we're going to go over to the other one. We're going to set it to 180 degrees. And what that means is that each time a particle is created, somewhere between 0 and 180 degrees, it's going to be turned. That way, it has randomness to it. Fire doesn't look, every lick of flame doesn't look exactly the same. Some of them look the same, but they may be slightly rotated. So that's what we're trying to give, is an illusion of the particles not being the same thing, which they actually are. And then our random rotation, I think I choose 0.5. So basically half of them will have a random rotation. What that means is when the person is looking at your fire from whatever direction they're looking at, it will have some symmetry, meaning it will look like the base of the fire is burning constantly in one way, whereas as you move further away from the start, you'll start to see those rotations and the fire will look more random. Our color is going to be white, and the reason why we're leaving it white is we're going to put a material on it, and we want that material only to show. If we were to change this, so we're going to obviously make it look like a flame. So if you wanted your flame to have some blue hint, like it was some type of magical potion burning or something, you want it to have a blue hint, then you would put blue in this. And so when it shined through our material, it would have that blue hint, or red, or green, or whatever it is if you were doing some kind of fantasy game. So you guys may choose in your level, this thing that you're creating, to put some fantasy in it. And maybe you're going to have a little bit of blue hint in your flame. Maybe you're going to have some green hint in your flame. That's completely up to you. I'm not dictating what you're supposed to be, but let's all start with white until we get it set up, and then you can go back and do your edits. Gravity modifier. If you guys were using a particle system to make water, gravity would matter. So gravity is set at 0. Look at what happens when I set it to 5. Oh, that was way too much gravity on it. Let's go 1. You see how it can't get off the ground because it only lives for 1 second. It's being pulled down. So it can't get anywhere. So if you were making water that was flowing, let's say, out of a hose, then you would want some gravity modifier on it because you would want it to be pulled down by gravity. So you'd want the particles to shoot out and then be pulled down. So that's what you would use that for. Simulation space is going to be local. If you set it to global, then it reorients everything in your game to face the same direction, which is globally XYZ, which means everything faces Z as the front, as it being its face, but we don't want that, so we're just going to leave it local. I don't think I had anything on simulation speed in my notes. Delta time. Delta is just time within this physical engine. So we're going to leave it scaled. It's going to stay the same. We want it to play on awake. It does have a rigid body, and the only thing this max particles changes is the max number of particles that you can have. So you see when I go up, it really doesn't add a lot, but if I go down, it really makes a difference. So the difference between 10, 100, and 1,000, because they only live for a second, we really don't see that much. But when I go down and I put in single digits, you really can see the difference. So what does this look like if it was going the opposite direction?
It'll go faster.
No, if you flipped it over and it was going the opposite direction, what would it look like? What would it look like?
Like hail?
Snow.
Snow. That's how snow is created in Unity. And what happens is you tell the particles not to die, and therefore each particle that lands becomes like a flake of snow. And as the characters come and they walk across it, their imprints of their steps are left in those particles, and it creates snow. The effect of walking through snow. That's how it's created. Now, generally, what people do is they actually texturize and create snowflakes, and then they have to create thousands of them because no snowflake is the same. You guys know that, right? Yeah. They're like thumbprints. And that way, when the snow falls, it looks like real snow because there's no similarity between any of the flakes. So it's actually a pretty long process to make really good-looking snow, but you guys could do it if you really wanted to. Auto random seeding, we're not going to touch that. For which one? Max particles? Oh, I'm sorry. Max particles, we're going to leave it at 1,000. Yeah, we're going to leave it at 1,000. Thank you for catching that. Emissions is our next item. You saw the little tab, it's already marked. And this is really controls how the particles are emitted over a period of time. And so I have it set at 10. I don't know what your default, what is your default? Is it 10?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I go up, you can see the effect. If I go up to 30, you can see the effect. This is somewhere you can play with the look of your fire once we make it, is the emission. So if it's how the particles are being emitted, wouldn't that kind of be similar to the intensity of a fire?
Yeah.
If I have 2 logs in a fire, it burns way differently than if there's 100 logs burning, right? So the bigger your fire, the higher you want this emission number to be. If you want your fire to be calm, a very quiet fire, then you would turn this number down. So we're going to actually go with, I went with 10 on the other one, so let's up it up a little bit. Let's go 30 on this one. Let's make it a little bit more raging fire than the one I made on my screen. Now we're going to leave rate over distance. We're going to leave it as is. The next one you see below it is shape. And this is really the big one on how you create things with a particle system. This is how you guys are going to be able to create all kind of crazy things that you may not even thought of until you started playing with this. Is just by changing this to different shapes, you can start to see how it affects the particles. Now we're using a cone, but as I change these shapes and as you change your shapes, look at how it affects just the base movement of the particles. And the last few ones are all based on your item. So here's a good fog one, like if you wanted fog on the ground, you'd obviously want to slow it down. But if you slowed it down to really, really slow, and you made the lifetime and extended more than 1 second, obviously make it more like 100 seconds, maybe 200 seconds. When a person walked through it, they would actually affect the fog and it would move around their feet because they would impact. There's my watch talking to me. So we're going to choose cone, which I think is the default. And our angle, because we want it to be a fire, we're going to select 0. So we want no angle. And then our radius on our fire is going to be 0.25 is what I have on that one. Will you be quiet, Mr. Watch? Or Miss Watch? So you should have something that looks kind of like this, what I have.
0.25?
Yeah.
That's 0.25 on that one to get that effect right there. Now yours make it look a little different, and that's fine. It's your fire. You're going to decide what it's going to look like. But understand the shape is really what sells the person on what it is that you have. So the shape that you have is going to dictate what the person's brain is going to think that you're creating. We're not going to affect anything else on this. Velocity over time is the next one. So if you go down, you see velocity over time, over lifetime, sorry. And that's something that you could, I just wanted to show it to you, that you can make it move in certain directions if you're creating something. So if you wanted something to be like curved or being pulled to one direction, that's a place where you can do that, but we're not going to use life. Don't click that one. The last two that we're going to use is going to be texture sheet animation and renderer. So texture sheet animation is not checked. You're going to check that one. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our own material. So you need to find the folder that says FX. And then inside FX it says Fire. And then inside Fires it says Materials and Textures. And then you will actually see Ember, Fire, Fire Alt, Flame 4x4, and Smoke. So what we're going to do is in that folder we're going to right click and we're going to create our own material. And we're going to call it Fire _ Alt 2. We're going to create our own material in that folder. So you right click, create material, and we're going to call it Fire Alt 2. I just got a 3 because I've already done it. Don't look at my 3. Yours is 2. If you want to name it 3, it doesn't matter, but mine says 3 because I already had an Alt 2. Yep. Fire Alt _ Alt 2. And the reason why I'm having you do that is so that you'll have 2 versions of Fire that they made that you could use along with yours, and then you'll have yours that you made. So we need this material in order to make this fire look like fire. So when I select it in the inspector panel, you see it says Fire Alt 3. Yours should say Fire Alt 2, and it has it. At the top next to shader, it has this thing that says standard. We're going to change this shader by clicking it, and when you scroll down, it actually says particles. Okay, see that? Okay, on the particles, you have choices, and I'll give you some hints about these because they can affect how your fire is going to look. Additive means it's going to add intensity to anything in this material type. So if it's red, it'll and it creates multiple ones, it's going to make the next couple more intense red. That makes sense? Additive soft is just going the opposite direction. The alphas actually deal with those transparent type shaders. So if you're dealing with water, that's when you use the alpha. But we're not doing any alphas right now. And then the rest of them are just about how it makes copies of itself. So we're going to choose additive because we're making fire and we're looking for intensity. And when you do that, it gives you the ability to have a texture sheet. You see that thing that says flame 4x4?
Yeah.
Stick it in that texture sheet. So you can drag it up there, you can click the button and find it by typing fire, and then you'll see 4x4. And that's what we want in there. Everyone got that? So now we have this image of a fire. So if you wanted to make your own fire or explosion, this is the basis of that visual element. So this has a 4x4 pictures of a fire, of pieces of fire. So what's going to happen is Unity is going to chop that up and run that like a flip book to give the illusion of a fire. If you were making an explosion, couldn't you do a similar thing? And it would run that like a flip book, and it would give you that illusion of a fire, of an explosion, as you had things in your system. So you can actually type in Unity material fires on Google and find actual tile boxes like this. And I've seen them as big as 16 by 16, and it gives you really detailed fire when they're 16 by 16. So go ahead and click your particle system again. And once you click your particle system on your inspector panel, slide it all the way to the bottom until you see default particle, which is what you're seeing, the smoke, the ghost, whatever you want to call it. Now to get that fire you just made in there, all you have to do is click and hold your fire alt and drag it into the bottom, and now it becomes part of that. Now there's one more step we have to do, so don't do anything after you drag it in. See how the fire just looks kind of weird? It looks like something out of an 8-bit video game?
Yeah.
The reason for that is we haven't told it what our tile sheet looks like. So under texture sheet animation, it should have popped open. God bless you. We're going to tell it our grid is 4 on the X and 4 on the Y. And now it'll read the paper correctly, and magic, now we have fire. Now the last piece to get it really looking like a fire is the renderer. Oops, no, it's not renderer. It is... Yes. Am I right? Yes. Size over lifetime. So size over lifetime, you have to put a check box in it, and then you have, it shows you this chart. As you change this, it affects how the fire moves. So as I move this bar, see how it affects my fire? But luckily it has presets, so I can just go right down here at the bottom. And I want to click it so that my bar goes from top to bottom, because I want my fire to run intensity from bottom to up. And then after that, it's really just about attaching it to your lantern and centering it, and maybe playing with some of those settings I showed you to get the fire to look the way you want it to look. So I would just find one of my torches. I got to find one that I haven't already used that has a fire. That one has a fire. So I don't believe this one has a fire. So this one doesn't have a fire over here, so I'm going to go ahead and take my particle system and I'm going to drag it into my lantern. And once I drag it into my lantern, all I have to do is go over and zero it out. And it's going to put it in the middle of that particular item. So now I can go to it, and there my fire is in the middle because it's zeroed out. And oops, make sure I click the particle system again because that's what I want to adjust. And then he's right. This fire looks too big for it, right? Yeah. So all I have to do is go over to my size and scale it down. Now it looks a little bit more believable right there. So that looks a little bit more believable, right? It's not quite in there right. It's kind of hard to put a particle system in there sometimes. It's a pain in the butt. So there we go. What didn't you pay attention to?